viewers, lovers of books, lovers of FEMRITE, welcome to this event. We are celebrating the FEMRITE Week of Literary Activities, and 2020 we are running the week under the theme Literary Arts and the Unfolding World. So this afternoon we have a panel discussion on writing memoirs, and we have quite a number of panelists, after which we'll have a book launch. So I would like to introduce to you the moderator of this session, Ms. Jocelyn Ekochu Bananuka Jocelyn Ekochu. Yes. I don't know if the order of the names is really significant, but yeah, that is the moderator of the session this afternoon. And Jocelyn is a member of FEMRITE. She's a writer with lots of writing to her name. One of her books is here, Shockwaves Across the Ocean, and she has quite a number of short stories and a few poems in different anthologies and collections. And Jocelyn has been part of FEMRITE from like long time ago. FEMRITE is over 22 years now, over 22 years old, and Jocelyn has been with it in different ways, in different aspects, at different levels, serving the organization up to where it is now. So I know she has served on the FEMRITE board as the chairperson, and she has served on the board in other different capacities, and we are happy to have her serve in this space today as the moderator of this awesome panel. And she will introduce to you the other team members that she's going to be discussing with in terms of writing memoirs. So Jocelyn, you're very welcome to this event, and we are happy to have you together with all the other members on the panel. So please take over from me, and let's have fun. Let's have fun.
Thank you, Julie, for those kind words and for that very wonderful introduction. Dear viewers who are joining us online, I would like to add my voice to Julie's to welcome you to join us as we enjoy the written word. Thank you so much. I will introduce our panelists, after which we shall give them a few questions which they will answer. After that, we have one of them whose book is going to be launched today, and that is Judy, and she will read from her book. After she has read from her book, then we shall open up the session to questions and answers, and then we shall launch the book. You're welcome. I would like to start by introducing the panelists who are online so that we don't lose them. Our first panelist is Philippa Namtevi Kabarika-Gwa. She is a storyteller, a poet, an author, and a holder of space. She is the co-founder and host of the Story Club Cape Town and Balisa Nati Storytelling Collective. She performs poetry, folktales, and personal stories at festivals, conferences, schools, organizations, open mics. She uses story, poetry, and songs to activate spaces, to comment, question, teach, invite, and to create community. Her platforms open up opportunities for both artists and the public to share stories, to connect, to collaborate, and to use them to create community. She approaches her work as an oral storyteller. Even when she writes, she is storytelling. She's the author of Flame and Song, a memoir, and so many stories. So many stories was published in Kampala. She's the author of Katiti's Song, she's the author of Katiti's Song and Kia Goes to School, which was published in 2009. She teaches and coaches storytelling to those who are interested. And in her work with individuals and organizations, she facilitates processes where they can reflect on their journeys, have difficult conversations, and dream new possibilities. Welcome, Philippa Namtebi Kabali-Kagwa. The next one, also online, is Dr. Damson Kahyana Phd, popularly known as Dr. D. He teaches literature at Makerere University. His areas of focus being oral literature, Ugandan literature, East African literature, and African poetry. He is widely published with creative work in anthologies like Dance the Guns to Silence, Michael's Eye, The War Against the Ugandan Child, We Have Crossed Many Rivers, New Poetry from Africa, and Wanderings of Hearts. He has also published a children's novel, Bira's Success, which was published in 2009. He is the editor, Fire on the Mountain, creative work on the Ohikira 2018, and co-editor, As I Stood Dead Before the World, creative writing from Ruzira Prison. His scholarly work has appeared in a number of journals. He is a President, PEN International Uganda Center. He is a former fellow of the African Humanities Program Postdoctoral Fellowship of the American Council of Land Societies. His memoir is still a work in progress, but for today, he is our academic muscle on this panel. Welcome, Dr. D. Damson Kahyana. Our next panelist is in the studio here with us, and that is Judy Commanding. She is a social development, governance, and gender equality specialist with 4 decades of work experience in the public, private, and non-profit sectors. She is a women's rights advocate and has worked with women's rights organizations and development partners on advancing women's rights, gender equality, women's participation in democratic governance for peaceful, sustainable development. She has published work on women leadership in conflict transformation, regional integration governance, and women's political leadership. She's a board member of AfriChild, a trustee of the Nabagereka Development Foundation, and a promoter of TPO Uganda. She has served on the boards of Action Uganda, Action Aid Malawi, Action Aid Uganda, Action Aid Malawi, Uganda Women's Network, Uganda Child Rights Network, and African Center for the Treatment and Rehabilitation of Torture Victims. Judy earned a BA from Makerere University and an MA in Peace and Justice Studies from the University of San Diego, California. Welcome, Judy Commanding. Our last but not least panelist is our very own chairperson of FEMRITE, Regina Assini. She is an activist, facilitator and trainer, publisher, editor, and author, passionate about social change. She believes in the power of stories as a tool for social change. She is the managing director of Wordsmith Publications Uganda Limited. She is the author of Shards of Brokenness, a poetry collection, and Solid Threads, a short story collection. Her other works have been published in a number of anthologies: Fire on the Mountain, Wandering of Hearts, A Thousand Voices Rising, The Boda Boda Anthem, Moonscapes, an anthology of poetry and short stories, Dear Neve, an anthology of contemporary East African writing, Go Tell Home, The Story is Endless, The List Cannot Be Completed. Welcome, Regina. Our dear viewers, now is the time that we've been waiting for. We are now going to, we have a very long menu of the written word, and our panelists are going to tell us how they do it. We are going to ask them questions that we think you need to know, and they are going to tell us. First off, I would like to start with Dr. Damson. Dr. D, what is the difference between a memoir and a biography? Because, I mean, we know that all of them tell one story. So what is the difference between a memoir and a biography? Okay, it looks like Dr. D is not yet online. We shall move on to Judy. Just tell us, I have seen a lot of works you have written. Most of them may be kind of academic. So how and when and why did you?
And it has taken me that time to write this particular memoir. It has been on and off because there have been periods of time when I was kind of disinterested. I did have the enthusiasm to continue writing, and then of course because I'm engaged with other work, and that also kind of detracted me. So I've been writing this particular book for over a period of 3 years. So the next question is why? I was motivated by two relatives of mine who took it upon themselves to establish the history of my great-grandfather. I am Ugandan by citizenship. My father is in Uganda, but my mother is South African. So I have roots in South Africa. So these two cousins of mine actually wrote the history of my great-grandfather, who is South African, and he is Zulu by birth and also by descent. So when I read his history, I found it very interesting because what they had written is that our particular clan goes back almost like 400 years. And my great-grandfather lived a very interesting life. So that is what motivated me. The second thing that motivated me was the fact that quite a number of people go through life and they don't tell their story. And when they move on and pass on, then people start scrambling to look for their stories. And I'm quite sure you must have seen this, unfortunately, when we are attending funeral services, when they say this particular person did this and this. So I thought myself, I think I should make it much easier for my family and friends to have something to say about me. And the best way I can do that is to write my story. So those were the two things. First of all, getting to know the history of my great-grandfather, and I was energized by that, but then also feeling that I need to tell my story so that the generations to come don't ask, who was she, what did she do? So that's how I did it. The how, I did some background reading because the choice could have been between writing my autobiography, but then having read other people's autobiographies, I found them, they were very good, but I found them very long. And I thought I wanted something really short and stuff so that people can actually go through. I read Joyce Mpanga's book. I also read Rebecca, a thick book, and you really need to be very, very not only enthusiastic, but because of the length of the book, it really takes you time to go through that. So then for me, I decided I think I'd be better off writing memoirs. I hope Dr. Damson will be able to join us to share with us the difference between a memoir and a biography so that people can decide how to write.
He's the academician here, so thank you so much. You have heard it from Shaka Zulu's granddaughter. Thank you so much, Judith. Now, Regina, I know you write a variety of things. You write fiction, you write everything that you come across. You are a writer in every sense of the word.
Thank you.
Can you tell us, how would you compare fiction and memoir writing? Which one is easier and why?
Thank you, Jocelyn. Fiction and memoir writing. I think if we look at fiction, fiction basically is imagination. You know, you make up story about characters, about certain places, and then you come up with a story. But then also one thing as a writer that I have learned is that usually writers will, in your fiction, in our fiction, there is an element of your experience. It might not be a personal experience. It might be an experience of friends, of society, stories that you have heard about in your day-to-day life. And then you mold it and make it, give it an element of fiction, whereby you patch up, you fill in the gaps, you know, with fiction. And the difference between fiction and memoir writing, of course, is that memoir writing is all way you can patch up. There's no way you can begin imagining what Kamani was saying when she was looking at you when you were standing at that funeral. If you're writing a memoir, you're not going. The reader actually would not expect you to give the thoughts of Kamani at that point, because you don't know that, unless Kamani is also telling you the story in your memoir. But then with fiction, I can imagine and say this is what she was thinking, and that is easier, you know. So for me, like memoir writing and fiction, writing fiction is kind of easier, because then you're able to mold situations, to mold experiences, to fit what you want to say. Because in a work of fiction, every word that you put there, every sentence has a bearing, which is not the same with memoir, because in life happens. There are coincidences that can happen. But if you're writing a fiction work, there are no coincidences. You know, it's not like, oh, then she got out and met her, and you find the police standing there, and suddenly that is what you wanted. It doesn't happen like that. But then, because the reader will question why did the policeman appear in your story, or in your work of fiction? And yet, in real life, I can meet a policeman, and it's a one-time meet, and I will not meet him again. So I think memoir writing is a little bit difficult for me as a writer personally, because then you have to stick to the facts. And I'm working on a biography, autobiography. I can call it an autobiography or stroke biography, because I'm writing stories of 3 different women in my family. My grandmother, my mother, and I want to write all those. I'm working on those. And one of the things that I've found very interesting is that we all remember things differently. So you find the same incident that I as a child remember, when I speak to my mother about it, she has a totally different story to give. And when I speak, like when I would relate to people with my grandmother, they would also give a totally different aspect of it. But it's the same incident, but there are 3 different stories that come out of it. And so with memoir writing, it is kind of, you have to stick to the facts. There's no bending the truth around there. This is what happened. Although you're telling it from your point of view as a writer, you give your particular point of view. I think in the biography, that's where you're able to give also other points of view. But in the memoir, it's basically, this is my point of view. So I find it a little bit difficult, because with fiction, I can then turn anything and tell the story that I want to tell it, which I'm not going to be able to tell in memoir writing. I will not change that I did like eating kalo as a child and say I enjoyed eating kalo, when everybody is saying like, no, you didn't like kalo. Yeah. I think that is it.
Thank you. That was very enlightening. You know, she didn't like Carol, and for her she wants to tell the story that she liked Carol, but there is a grandmother who knows she didn't like Carol. In my language they say, akakikuruka kumanya kurukura kakafa. You know, like an old woman that knows you should die when you grow up, because she will tell the stories. Thank you so much. It is time to hear from Philippa. Philippa, writing one's story must involve emotions and pains. How do you manage to waddle through them and come out with an authentic story? Because most of the people who write, you find, I mean, when you write your own story, it means there is somewhere pain, there is somewhere joy. How do you go through those emotions and come out with an authentic story? Philippa.
Well, I think life is about pain and it is about joy, and the process of writing, for most people, and I think when it comes to memoir writing, there is it's a process of reflecting on what happened and making sense of things. Usually, you know, when I was writing my memoir, for example, many of the things I spoke about were things that happened many years ago, and when things have been painful in the writing, I've cried, I've put my pen down, I have walked away from the writing, and then I've come back to it and made sense of it. But often what one speaks about then, because it's not a fresh wound, I think it's easier to speak about, it's easier to process, it's easier to make sense of, because there's distance, and with distance comes perspective and context, and one is able to put things in. But I know that, for example, when I was writing my memoir, there was a part when I was writing about my siblings who had cerebral palsy. And when I started writing about it, I think there was a lot of unprocessed grief that came up. And so writing that particular chapter, I think I took 2-3 weeks. I took a longer time than my editor expected, but I think it was because I needed the time and the space to process and to make sense of things. And I think that's really what the writing process is, that you write, you stop, you reflect, you let it go, you walk away, you come back to it, and you continue.
Thank you so much, Philippa. Sorry about your loss. That was very painful. Do we have Damson yet? Okay.
Yeah, I'm here.
Dr. D, you are welcome. You're welcome. Okay, we started off by introducing you in your absentia, but the...
Well, I had part of it, and it was very good. I'm sorry that I missed your beautiful introduction.
Okay, you are welcome. Now, what is the difference between a memoir and a biography? The viewers and the listeners would like to know.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I think a biography is very, very, very easy to take care of, because with a biography you're writing someone's story. Maybe the more difficult question is the difference between a memoir and an autobiography, because in both the subject, the writing subject, is also the protagonist. And there's a lot of debate in the academia whether the difference is that big or that significant, but I think there is. With a memoir, as I understand it, and as a number of academics have said, you're doing selective remembering. You're doing selective remembering. If I give an example of myself, I'm 44 years now, and if I'm working on a memoir, I don't have to tell my story from the beginning to up to where I am. I could choose an incident in my childhood when I dreamt that I was walking with Jesus on the waters. I still pray that I get that dream again. It hasn't come back yet. and I try to make sense of that dream. Then I go to my primary school. When I had where my packed lunch was potatoes and groundnuts, and was never heard of that one carried potatoes and groundnuts. Many people carried more better foods than that. Then I got, so basically I'm selecting my memories. And I could choose to work with 10 memories, I could choose to work with 20 memories, and I have those. An autobiography doesn't work quite like that. An autobiography seems to, claims to give a life as so far lived. Although I think one can choose to give a particular part of their life, not necessarily the whole of it from when they remember it. But a memoir is more selective. And in my view, I think this is the reason why memoirs are becoming more popular than autobiographies, because I think an autobiography is quite a lie. There's a limit to how much you can remember. I don't know, like Philippa or Regina. Regina says the same incident will be remembered differently by different people. When you're working with a memoir and you say, okay, I'm going to look at my high school days, or I'm going to look at my college days, or I'm going to mix. I have some college days, basically you're selecting what you want to remember. With an autobiography, it's a bigger animal than a memoir, and that's why personally I don't like autobiographies. I prefer memoirs, because memoirs are more authentic to me, since the person is doing selective remembering, unlike the biographer who claims to give you a life as so far lived. For the biography, it's very easy. You're telling somebody else's story. If you're doing it like Regina is doing, my grandmother, my mother and I, then you have, you don't have it's not a biography. She said to be a biography and autobiography, and she's right. She's a mixture of two. But since she's a writing subject, and she's writing her memories of the other two and herself, then at the end of the day, it is her story. And if she's going to give us the long durée, as they call it in academics, the longer period, maybe starting so far away, and then give us systematically how this subject has moved and so on, that will be an autobiography. But if she's going to select particular memories, which is what I find very fascinating with memoirs, then that will be a memoir. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. D. I can assure you I'm not the only one who didn't know the difference between a memoir and an autobiography. So many people tend to mix them up. While you are still with us, Dr. D, can you please comment on the statement, writing is good therapy, but good therapy is not necessarily good writing?
Thank you. I think that's a beautiful statement. Yeah, I think writing, if you go back to the work of Freud and what is called the talking cure, Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, believed that when people have gone through traumatic experiences, one way of healing them is to make them talk about it. And one of the reasons for doing that is that the more you talk about it, the more you discover that there are gaps in what you're saying. In fact, what you have gone through is than what you are capable of explaining. And that's why we can revisit an incident that has happened to your life a lot of times. A traumatic incident, like maybe being beaten by, I don't know, stereotype stepmothers. I had a lovely stepmother, and she's still one of my best friends. But many people have not had very good stepmothers, and one of my stepmothers was not very good to me anyway. So the more you remember, I'll give you an example. When I was in senior 3 at St. Leo's College in Port Porto, I happened to be the first in the class, a class of 148 children. And that school was great that time. It was the entire kind of school, not King's College good already, but it was great that time. So it would collect the best kids from Western Uganda, if you like. And somehow I was always number 4, number 5, number 6 in the class. But this particular term, third term, I think because I had dropped many subjects and I was doing what I loved, including not chemistry, which somebody had forced me to do. I didn't want to become a chemical engineer, I wanted to become a storyteller. I improved and I became the best in the class. And my father, who was a fish seller, came to know about it even before I returned from school. I don't know, and there were no phones that time. I'm talking about 1993. There were no phones that time. I think the very rich had phones in Kampala, Celtel and so on. I don't know whether they had phones that time or not. Memory is difficult, you don't remember everything. But my father, the fish seller, bought what is considered the prize, the best species of fish in Kasese. And in the local language it's called Enzungu. It's golden and very rare, and it's very expensive. So as a fish seller, he thought the best way of acknowledging my achievement was to buy me that golden fish. Now, my mother had separated with him, and I had to raise step money. Well, I come from a polygamous family, and I think I'm not, I don't have comments about it, because if you read my story, you'll find a lot of polygamous situations and so on. And none of the three mothers touched the fish. None of the three mothers touched the golden fish. When my father came back from work at about 8 p.m., he noticed that I was partaking of the common dish, which that time happened to be bean soup. And as an old man, he didn't raise any question. But at night, around 10 p.m., I really imagine we were all going to sleep. He started asking what happened. And that's when I came to realize that actually there was fish that had been prepared for me and was not cooked. Now, as a young child, I was maybe 14, 13, senior 15 maybe, I don't remember. Whether I was 14 or 15, I would have worked it out, subtract that year from my years now. I didn't take it seriously. But the more I kept remembering that, the more I kept just feeling more pain by it, because I now began to decipher the imagery and the symbolism and so on. At that time in senior 1993, it was just a fish that was not cooked. When I reached senior 6 and my father died, it was not just a fish that had not been cooked. It was love. It was a love from a father, and love that was sabotaged, love that was thwarted by the love politics in the family. Now, that's something I've not seen in 1993. But come 1996, I see. When I came to university and I reflected about it, I said, what happens to the fish that are not cooked? Oh, it goes rotten. What happens to other things? Oh, they get maggots, they become smelly. Oh my God. So what happened to that fish? Was it thrown away? Was it buried? Was it what? Now this is at the university. And I'm thinking about that. At the moment, I tell you, I even have nightmares about it. I nightmares about that fish that was not prepared. What does this mean? Writing is therapy in the sense that by trying to get hold of this thing that is so hard to understand, then you get it out of your system. Not the whole of it, of course. Something remains. And that thing that remains is part of our wound. And as human beings, we have this wound that goes with us everywhere we are. Even when you're very, very happy, there's a wound in you. That's why a musician like Sasha Brighton sings today, I'm so lucky. And it's a beautiful song. You feel like dancing. That's so beautiful. Then the following day she sings, love and Daniel. You know, that love is so terrible. You're like, how can the person who sings that love is so beautiful, they're listening that love is so terrible? No. Now, as you're writing this story, the onion, it's like you're putting, you're peeling this onion, and so many layers are peeling themselves and so on. And the more you peel the onion, the more tears that come out. And that's how writing becomes therapy. Sorry, I'm taking too long, but I think maybe I should stop there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I told our viewers that you are our academic muscle today. So thank you for that very elaborate explanation. Now, Judy, a person's life is always entangled with other people's story without dragging them along into your story?
Thank you very much. That is a very important question. My response to it is that there is no way you can write your memoirs, which are supposed to be authentic, and not get other people out of it. As human beings, we interact with other human beings. They impact us, we also impact them. So when you're writing your memoirs, and I like what Dr. Damson said, that with memoirs, there are selected episodes in your life. Yeah? And you purposely select those episodes because something happened. And when something happens, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens with somebody or with a group of people. Now, the challenge when you're writing your memoirs becomes on how you select certain incidents, because some of them can be very sensitive, yeah? And people, when they read your memoirs, can get offended. So then the challenge for you as an author is to think and say, okay, fine, this happened in my life. Okay? Person X was part of that, you know. So shouldn't I, you know, include that particular episode or even mention that particular person? It is a very delicate balance that you have to, you know, work on. But I personally believe that if you do not include people, for example, when you're writing your memoirs, then they do not become interesting, because stories are about our interactions with other human beings. So, for example, in my memoir, the very first chapter is basically my interaction with my mother. And then when you read the book, you see how it leads. But then there was an incident, for instance, where she actually dropped me, and I fell. And if you see this particular scar, that was a result of that, you know. So then the question is, do I or don't I, you know, for example, say, write stories about such incidents? And having read other autobiographies and also other memoirs, I personally feel that the more you actually include people in your stories, then people are able to relate and say, aha, yes, that I relate to. I kind of experienced that. And in so doing, then they too are learning. You know, it is experiential learning. And that's why, for me, the writing of memoirs, the writing of autobiographies and biographies is for other people to share, you know, experiences and also to learn. But I cannot see a memoir or an autobiography being written without entangling other people in the story. Otherwise, it becomes dead.
Thank you, Judy. And that explanation brings me to my next question, which goes to Regina. How do you leave sensitive details out of a memoir without depriving the reader of the real story?
I think Judy has answered the question because, you know, usually we have different faces as people. We have the public face, you know, the story that everybody knows about Regina. She is this, she is this, like that public. But then I think when you get down to write a memoir and you want to tell your story, that what happened in that incident, it kind of becomes very difficult to leave out details, because when you leave out details, then you're kind of like just giving us the public story. And I think so many times, sometimes you read a memoir, you read an autobiography of someone and you're really looking forward to it, And at the end of it all, you kind of feel, I've had those experiences where I kind of feel like, okay, it's not really that inspiring as I expected of the person. Because one of the reasons I would want to read an autobiography, one of the reasons I would want to read a memoir is what pushes, what motivates this person. And that usually is the internal, those sensitive details, what we can call the sensitive details. They are conscious, like what do they think about in the privacy of their bedrooms or wherever it is. And what are those things that drive them? Yes, he's a public figure, but what is what is the person or the private man? And I think that is the story. That's what makes us at the end of it all. Because, you know, it's very easy out here, we make decisions, but rarely there's something that is making you make a particular decision. And what is that? And I think that is the real story that a reader would want to read from your memoir. Like, I wouldn't really want to just read what I can get from the newspaper, what I can get from, I think one of the reasons why people are very interested in tabloids is because of those details, those sensitive details, you know. Of course, we have that idea like tabloids are just gossip and makeup, but they give that those sensitive details, and that's why you find like tabloids will always sell out, because people are interested in those stories, the sensitive part of those details, the small details, and so it's kind of difficult when you're writing really to leave out those sensitive. Of course, I remember one time I wrote, it was just a few pages, paragraphs. I was writing about a particular incident, and I presented it to the Readers Writers Club here. And one of the comments that came out was like, it doesn't read true. And when I sat down with one person and asked, they were like, I kind of feel like there's something lacking, like the thoughts behind the actions. And when they mentioned it, I was like, actually, that's true, because I'd left out a lot of information, which I felt was sensitive. But you see, like, the reader picked it and realized, no, this doesn't work. It doesn't read true. It's not credible. It almost becomes like it's a lie. But yet, if you had included the details, they would have identified with it. And that is what the reader is looking for. And so it's very difficult. I cannot answer and say you can leave out sensitive details. I think when you go out to say I'm writing a memoir, or I'm writing my autobiography, or I'm telling someone else's story, you should be ready to include those, because what readers are always interested in are those details. What is that? What are the thoughts? What are the decisions? Like at the end of it all, when we see you make this decision, what is the process that you have gone through to come to this decision? That is what we are interested in reading. What is that mess that you deal with that pushes you to cry, that pushes you to sing, that pushes you to laugh? And those are the things that we would want to read, I think. Human beings, we're interested in people's lives. And that is why we will always look for those details. Otherwise, I'll just go and buy a newspaper and read. Why would I have to buy an autobiography or a memoir that is just telling the surface story? Yeah.
Thank you so much, Regina. Listeners, you now understand that if you are going to write, you are actually going to write. There is no sugarcoating. We are coming back to Philippa online. Some stories are inspired by past pain. Does putting them on paper facilitate healing? We've actually had your own story. We've had your own pains. So would you say that putting those stories on paper facilitate healing?
Okay.
Okay, we can hear you now.
All right. So I want to answer this question, but I also want to link to the other question that you asked, Regina, because I think that while when one writes memoirs, it's important to tell, you have to be vulnerable in order for you to tell your story. If you are not vulnerable, if you do not, then you're really not telling the story. So there is a need to tell the story. However, for me, in the writing process, there were certain stories, a memoir, things that I remembered, and I actually wrote a whole story about it. And after I had written it, I realized I'd gone through the process, and that was not a story I necessarily wanted to put out in the public space. But the process of reflecting on that memory and processing it was healing for me. I was able to put it to rest. I was able to put it into the context of the rest of my life, and I was able to let it go. There were certain stories which I felt this is not necessarily belongs to more than myself, and in order for me to tell this story, because it reveals a lot about this person or that person, it was important for me to then not tell that story. Because I think that even though you're writing, as a memoir, you're writing from your own perspective, there's a need, there's a need to also acknowledge other people. And one has to know, this I can tell and this maybe not now. But the process of writing, I think for me, is a process of making sense of things that happened. You remember in a particular way, the people that you're with might not remember the situation in that way. And then there's a process of actually letting go and having context, because now there's time and you processed it and you made sense of it. And yes, there is a big element, I think, of feeling and celebrating. And also, it's not only about the pain, I mean, I think there's a lot of things you remember that are painful, but there's also joy, there's also laughter, there's also remembering how stupid you were in certain situations. So that's my response.
Okay, thank you so much, Philippa. Yeah, there are so many stupid things we did, and we look back and we wonder whether we are the ones who did that. And I believe they should be put on paper. So we are getting back to Dr. Damson. Dr. Damson, would you say that our social history directs our story? And can one story defy their social history?
Your question is binary, eh? I think things are complicated. Our social history for sure directs our story. But there comes the time when you resist the story. There comes the time when you resist the story and start asking questions. But why are you taking this story? If this is what happened, why did it have happened like that, and so on. So I would say that I think the dialogic engagement, the writer and the story are wrestling each other, and the writer does not necessarily follow the story. Sometimes you stop and say, wait a minute, is that true? Is that actually what happened? And you're reflecting about many things. In fact, writing a memory is there's a theorist called Homi Bhabha. He says remembering is remembering with a hyphen. Remembering is remembering. Remembering is bringing so many members together. So when things happen, they happen in several contexts. There are different reasons and so on. As you're writing that thing that happened, in a way you're separating the many things that happen, and you're trying to make sense of them. And after separating them, you bring them together. That's why he says remembering is remembering. You separate, you dismember, and you try to remember. And as you're doing that, of course, many things are happening. The story changes, for better or for worse, and you change with that story as well as time is going on. Because life is complicated. For example, if we go back to what Philippa has said, that you know, writing is about healing and about love as well and so on. But look at this healing. Sometimes the more you heal, the more you get wounded. It sounds very paradoxical, but when you look at our childhood, how come our childhood was so beautiful? It's because we never looked hard enough. You never looked hard enough, you know. Judy has a scar, and that scar will keep communicating different things every time she grows. At one point, we'll communicate love, another time, we'll communicate neglect, and the more she engages with the scar, the more she will see. When we are young, we don't ask too many questions. And because we don't ask too many questions, I think we're living a happy life. We don't look closely, we don't see much. So the more you look, the more you discover that actually what you thought was healing is actually even more woundedness. And healing and woundedness are on a continuum. It doesn't mean that there's no healing in writing, but the more you write, the more you ask questions. How could this happen to me? Why could this happen to me? And the more you ask these difficult questions, the more you look at your experience. And you discover that the marriage you thought was so happy actually has a lot of traumatic issues. What you thought was just not so important, like someone throws a tantrum and throws a glass down, a glass breaks. You pick it up, honey, it will be fine. Okay, but the more you look and you say, wait a minute, supposing there was no glass, what would have happened? Maybe his fist would have come to me. So that means that what you have said, our social history directs what we write. But the writing process also can help you ask more questions about the writing history, about the social history of gone through. And the writing process can destabilize what even you thought was true. And you begin to realize, look, this was not love, this was something else. You begin to realize, look, this was not a happy childhood after all. I think it was just happy because I had not looked hard enough. So our social histories direct what we write, but the writing process has the capacity to also raise several questions about what we consider as history. What is history anyway? And what makes it history? What you write can actually symbolize what the social history you had always thought was is. And so the moment what we write begins, and I think good writing is that which begins to destabilize what we consider as normal, what we consider as social history, what we consider as the master narrative, if you like. And the more questions you ask, why, how, in what way, and so on, the more you realize that the so-called social history can also change. The definition you give the social history will depend on the kind of questions you bring onto it. Meaning that social history directs what we write, but what we write also has the capacity to revisit and redefine what we consider as social history. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Damson. That's a world of knowledge that you have out there. Judy, you must have a very fascinating history, being a Zulu. But I mean, we are Africans. When you are part of a community, you are part of that community. So would you say, I mean, how does memoir writing, or would you say memoir writing facilitates cultural preservation? And if so, how?
Thank you for that question. I'm not an anthropologist, and I'm not a sociologist, but my understanding or definition of culture revolves around human behavior. And therefore, for me, culture is shared human behavior and learned human behavior. We're all familiar, again, with the South African word Ubuntu, which is humanness or humanity, which over the years has been translated to mean I am because we are, you know. And coming back home here, we also have the word Ubuntu, which, when you analyze, describes all the values that we have that inform our human behavior. I just want to give you one example, and this is now from this side of my family, of shared behavior. My grandmother, part of my childhood I spent in my grandmother's house. And my memory is lunchtime with my grandmother. We would sit around the table. The food would be brought. So we'd have matoke served in a large oval platter covered with matoke leaves. Then my grandmother would uncover, and then she would take a plate and almost slice half of that food, matoke, and put it on one plate. Now you'll ask me whose plate that was. That particular plate was meant for a family friend who was a coffee dealer and had a shop at the bottom of the hill. Now, because he was a coffee dealer, he could not move away from his store. And because he was a family friend, my grandmother felt that food had to be taken to him. Now, my grandmother's, the way her thinking was that he had to be given half of that food, because you know with matoke, it becomes cold and hard very quickly. So her argument was, by the time that food gets to him, it will not be palatable, you know. But the other half was meant to feed 6 other children. So you can see that half of that particular food was meant for one person, yeah? And the other half was meant for all of us. And for us as children, you know, we just look at our grandmother and said, how can she do this? You know? How can she give that particular person so much food when we are there? That was then when I was young. Now I'm much older and I'm able to understand where she's coming from. Because as part of our culture, you think about others first. Yeah? And that is where the issue of Ubuntu actually comes. So it is all about empathy, it's all about sharing, it's all about caring and so on. Not that she wasn't caring about us, the grandchildren, but then there's that communal caring, you know, because she knows, yeah, okay, fine, they can eat what is doing, but they can also have something else. So for me, to answer your particular question, again, you know, it is all, for me, I certainly believe that when you write, yeah, these are some of the stories then which then preserve, you know, our cultures. Then another very quick example that I want to give. When we were young, okay, we didn't have these toys that we see that are manufactured, imported from China, imported from UK. As children, we actually went into the vegetation and picked things and then designed toys, yeah, of our own nature. I don't know whether you remember that game where you sticks, yeah, they're about that high. You'd get about 20 of those sticks, hold them in your hand, yeah, and then release them and let them go. And then the trick of the game was you to be able to get one stick away from the rest without moving any single stick. Now that was a very difficult game, but it was a technique, and we were using materials that were from around us, you know. But these days I no longer see our children, our grandchildren, you know, using what they have in the environment, using what comes from our culture to inform how they actually grow up. So then to answer your particular question, yes, indeed, memoir writing does facilitate cultural preservation. And there's several examples that are written in my book which demonstrate that.
Okay, thank you so much. As we come towards the end of the session, Regina, can you tell us what are the aspects of a good memoir? I mean, you can be sure there are so many people online who are ready with their computers.
I think that is, I think for me it has to have a good story, you know. It has to have a story, and that includes, when I talk about a story, I'll use it's a common thing in the world of the journalists. They say what makes news, you know. They say if a dog bites a man, that's not news. But if a man bites a dog, then that is news. And so as we are doing these selective memories, like choosing the memories we want to write, something must have happened. Something that we feel is almost as good as a man biting a dog, which will make people want to read. What is it that? So it has to have that plot, you know, the cause and effect, and not just the cause and effect, but it has to be something that is intriguing, something that actually, it doesn't really even necessarily have to be intriguing, but it has to be something that had an impact on you as the writer, because you're telling it from your perspective, as you're recording your memory. So when we're doing selective writing, I think that's the difference. I think that's why Damson, Dr. Dike said he loves memoir more than autobiography, because then you're able to select those particular stories that you feel are worth telling, those particular stories that you feel have the aspect of what a good story is. And we all know that a good story should be a story that engages your reader. So I would I'm very interested in knowing what exactly Judy's mom was doing when she dropped the baby. and so, you know, that is a story that I would really want to engage with. And so it's not just about saying like, oh, I woke up and then I walked to town. So what? You know? So what happened along the way? That's the story we want to know. And so when looking about the aspects, for me, I always, as a publisher and an editor, I always start from the story. For me, it is all the story. That story of the man biting the dog, and not the other way around.
Thank you so much, Regina. There has to be something extraordinary to be told, because it's not a matter of I woke up in the morning, I had my tea, I went to work, so what? The last one for Philippa. Where should an aspiring memoir writer start from?
They must start from where they start. I think people need their different ways of starting. So I have friends who are very structured, and so they will come up with a mock title and plan chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, and then start writing. My process is an image, I work with it. When I wrote Flame and Song, I had a whole collection of different pieces. And then I began to think of what is the thing that holds it together, and I had the image of fire. And then I used that to name the chapters, and then I wove it together, and then I worked with my editor. So the first thing is, I believe everybody has a story, and your story is interesting.
We seem to have lost her.
Have you lost me?
No, you're
I'm
back.
not there.
You're back, yeah.
You're back, yes.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
My internet is unstable. I'll remove my face. So to start with, believe that your story is interesting. It will touch somebody. When you tell a story, it invites another story. And when people are listening to your story, their life story is going in their mind like a film, and they're able to reflect on their own lives. So start with your story and write, and follow where the story is taking you. And don't edit it too much in the beginning. Just take whatever is coming and work with it and have a collection of it, and then go into the editorial work of rewriting and finding the connections. Trust your process. If your sister or your neighbor is very structured and they tell you must first write like this and then like this and then like this, but you don't write like that, then don't write the way they want you to write. Follow your story, follow the images of the story. And also, I think one of the things, I guess as an oral storyteller, I believe actually that writers and storytellers, we work, and our job is to tell people pictures. So when you're writing your story, write, and that katogo that you ate when Jaja cooked, muogo, nevi janja, with samuri, and you walked into the house, describe the smell, describe the taste, so that when your reader is reading your story, they can taste that katogo that your Jaja cooked. They can feel that soft, flabby arm of your Jaja that shook like jelly and that you like to touch. They can see you, they can see the world that you are creating. Because that is your job as a storyteller, that is your job as a writer. Start where you want and just follow the story.
Thank you, Philippa. Excuse me.
And done.
I like what you said about writing what you want to write and not writing what they want you to write. Because it is your story, you know what you want to tell your readers. Thank you so much. Members, we are coming towards the end of our session, and we are going to have Judy read from her book, after which we shall answer, we shall entertain questions, some of which I have already received. You tell us, we are about to launch your book, Living in the Moment. Before you read, what are the highlights of the story, and what would you like readers to take home?
Thank you very much. My memoirs are in a series of chapters, and they are selected episodes in my life. So the highlights are, for example, growing up in a mixed ethnic family where the spoken language had to be either English, had to be either Luganda, or had to be Zulu. The second highlight of my story is my early childhood education, which part of it was outside Uganda. In fact, it was in India. So then it's all about how a young child is taken to boarding school. The boarding school is Catholic, I am Protestant. Then having to learn the Catholic sacraments, having to navigate in a country where the people are not of my ethnicity, they are of Asian origin, and surviving all that. Then school, of course, coming back to Uganda, attending a day school. But then even while I was schooling, discovering a talent I had, an athletic talent, at a very young age, because when you read my book, you will see that at the age of 13, I was a member of the Uganda independence team that actually participated in an event at Nakifo Stadium. 13, Independence Uganda. So that is something. Then going to a boarding school and high school, living through all the things that most of us are familiar with, study, and where you have your parents wanting you to excel, and how you actually struggle, but and your teachers also, kind of pushing you along, and how, for example, even in our education, we end up being who we are or achieving what we've achieved because of other people, and not necessarily because of ourselves. Then another chapter, I describe walking the corridors of political power. I come from a very political family. When you get to read the book, you will see. So seeing how politics played in the 70s and in the 80s, and the upheavals around that, going into exile, etc., and so on. That is another whole chapter. But then the one that, what is dear to my heart is the service to Ugandans. As I told you at the beginning, I am a consultant in social development, governance and gender equality. So over the years, how have I given back what I have been given? Because there's a saying, to whom much is given, much is required. Yeah. So then my story is about using what I have been given and giving back to women, giving back to children. So basically those are the highlights of my book.
Thank you. You've heard it, and we are going to launch it after she has read. I hope you are ready to buy copies. So now here is Judy with her story.
Thank you. I decided just to read this one paragraph because I think it will resonate with us, what is happening in the world, especially around racism. So I thought I'd want to share with you that racism is not necessarily out there, we also have it here in Africa. So Zimbabwe was the first country where I came face to face with racism. Racism existed at Maronda High School at the time when the majority of the teachers and the head of the school were white.
We cannot hear.
It's muted. The studio thing is muted, so we can't hear.
Oh, we cannot hear.
Microphone is muted.
The studio is muted.
I have to go back to the question.
Judy, your microphone is muted.
Yeah, the technician is coming.
Now we can
Okay.
hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I've decided to share with you a paragraph in my book which is all about racism. I thought it was relevant based on what is actually happening in the world today, especially in the United States of America. We hear a lot about racism, but I think racism is also here on our continent. So it goes like this. Zimbabwe was the first country where I came face to face with racism. Racism existed at Maronda High School at the time when the majority of the teachers and the head of the school were white. It was subtle, it was nuanced, and difficult to engage with head-on. For instance, on campus, the white teachers pretended to be friendly, but off campus, when I happened to bump into them at either the supermarket or the bank, or the post office, somehow I became totally invisible to them. They pretended not to see me. They did not want other whites beyond the confines of Barandra High School to see them associating with a black person. That irked me, as did many other incidents. One day, I had gone to Celentin's supermarket along 5th Street to do my weekly shopping, and I queued up at the only till that was being operated by a white lady. There were some customers behind me, all black Zimbabweans. The lady at the till stood up and walked away without saying anything. We waited, thinking that she was returning soon to serve us. We waited for a couple of minutes, and then another white lady appeared and went and sat at another till. "You come here," she bellowed. I was first of all shocked by the command, and secondly perturbed by the tone of the command. "There is no need for you to shout at us like that," I said. "I did not shout at you," she retorted. "Yes, you did." "Would you have shouted so rudely if we were white people?" I replied. "Yes, you tell her. Tell her she shouted at us rudely. You tell her," the people standing behind me whispered in muted voices. Not a single one of them came out boldly and loudly to support me openly for what I had said. The specter of racism and all its manifestations continued to cover down and subdue black Zimbabweans 4 years after independence. Many still could not speak out against racist acts. I was told that even a year after independence, white people still jumped queues at the local post office and no black person dared challenge them.
Wow, I want the book. I want the book. I want a double portion of the story. That was very, very well written, and I can actually see you guys there, and I can see people behind you saying, tell her, when they couldn't even dare to tell her themselves. So at this particular moment, we are going to ask our panelists to answer questions from the audience. And the first question is from Dr. Ebila. And the question is, can you comment on the assertion that there is sometimes fiction in autobiographical writings and memoirs? I refer to Soyinka's A.K. And I will request Dr. Damson to answer that.
Thank you so much for that question. As you're aware, Dr. Florence Ebila is the expert. On autobiographical writing. Her PhD is on the autobiographies of African women leaders, including Sharif Johnson. And recently, she read a fascinating paper at Makerere on the autobiography of, I forget the name now, the lady who runs a charity on Ginger Road. Yes, I agree completely with that, because I think Regina gave us a very good starting point to answer this question by Dr. Ebilas. When people remember things differently, Regina said that if you're writing about an event that happened some time back and 3 people are involved, they will remember the incident differently. Memory itself is like a story, and remember something, you go through stages and stages and stages. And that means that the memory cannot come in one flash and you see everything as it happened. Memory comes in bits, and the more you open, the more you see more, the more you see more, the more you see more. That means that every autobiography is a reconstruction. And at a reconstruction, there is some fiction that comes in, either in the ordering of the events or even in the dialogue that you reproduce. I don't think that anybody can photographically remember what was said, how it was said, and so on. So many of these things are reconstructed. And the whole let's look at Makerere University's main building. We are told they are going to reconstruct it, which is good. But will it ever be the same building as we know it today? It will never. So every autobiography, every memoir is a reconstruction of one's experience through the medium of memory. And the moment you are reconstructing something, you are making, there will be some bit that will be making up, either in the ordering of the events, in the details of the events, and so on. And to prove this, some people actually do research about the memories they want to write about. The act of doing research about the memory you want to write about, you go back to the place where you were born, you look at the tree, you want to describe how big it is, and so on. All this shows you that as a human being, you're limited in how much you can remember, and you need to be aided in that remembrance. And so any autobiography or any memoir that claims to be 100% true is not a lie as such, but the word true has to be understood from what Chinua Achebe calls the truth of fiction. Fiction is not a lie, fiction is true. And the truth in autobiography, the truth in memoir, is both what we can call historical truth, because everything is based on what happened, but also fictional truth, in the sense that the dialogue that is being reconstructed, the memory that is being reconstructed, has a role to play in the story as it's being told. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope Dr. Ibira, Florence, you heard it from your colleague himself. None of us could have answered it that way, and that is the reason he's here. We have another question from Amoni Kitoke, or is it Chitoke? How authentically can one present events in a memoir as they happened without assigning them meaning that was conceived in light of the events that came subsequent to them? Is it even necessary to memorize things as they happen, or is it more necessary to present the meaning subsequently assigned to them? And I'll give this to Regina.
Okay. I think the question sounds almost similar to Dr. Gila's question. And I'll focus on the aspect of the necessity of memorizing. And I think he's also looking at remembering in retrospective, you know, what Dr. DK was talking about, when the more you think about things, the more you discover different layers, the more it's like you're peeling an onion and laying it off. And I think most times when we choose to tell these stories, there is a reason why we want to tell it. One, Judy gave us why she was inspired, the two reasons that inspired her to write her memoir. Of course, the story of her grandfather, and then her own desire to put the story out there. And I think all of us have reasons why. Sometimes it's a healing process, just like Philippa says. You use it to heal. Sometimes it's just a story that we feel we want to tell it. Maybe it will inspire someone out there. And so it's not because it is necessary for us to memorize, but because those stories live with us, you know. They live with us. I personally believe that we have stories that cry out to be told. And so it's almost like you will bear that burden until you tell that story at one time, in whatever medium, whether it is writing or just sitting down and telling it to your grandchildren or children or neighbors or friends. Their story we want to be told. And so it's not that you're choosing to remember, it's not that you're choosing to memorize, but it's because these are stories of your life. They are part and parcel of you. They make you up. They are like the sum of you. And so you will remember it. You don't choose to remember, to memorize. But then when we are telling it, I think we always tell from that, just like Doctor said, we cannot tell it as it was. You know, we cannot say this is exactly what happened. You know, I remember one of my very vague memories is that I loved telling stories as a child, and that is a very vague memory that I have. And when my family members learned that I deal with writing and telling stories, they're not surprised. They're like, oh, that was told stories from when she was a young child. But I can't remember that. It's just a vague memory somewhere there that I remember. But then the other people will be able, so when I'm to write my memoir, I need to go back and speak to my mother, speak to my sisters, speak to my aunties, and know what were the kind of stories that I told as a child. What was it, and all that. So so when I'm writing, I'm not going to say, this is what happened. I'm just going to give a memory of it. Just like Doctor said. And then I will choose, and I will always be looking back in retrospective. I'm always looking at, depending on what happened next, the things that happened, looking at this is what happened. Doctor gave us an example of the story of the fish, and how he has thought about it over the years, you know. So at the moment when he is telling that story, he is not just telling the story of how he passed, and his father bought the fish, and they did cook it for him. But he will give the subsequent events that happened that, okay, they refused. Why my stepmothers didn't cook the fish? Probably if my mom had been there, she would have cooked me the fish. And so there is always the other things, the events that come after that. And so we will never really say, I'm just telling this as it was, and that is it. But we are always looking through the lens of the many years that have gone back, looking back, this is what happened. And I think that's why it's very difficult sometimes to, as a writer, it's very difficult sometimes to tell stories in the voice of a child. Because even though it happened to me as a child, I experienced it as a child, I will always tell it from looking through the lens of other things that have happened to me. And so by the time I reach the story of the child, I'm just giving, just like Doctor said, a memory of it, but not really the entire thing as it was. So that is it.
Thank you so much. I believe you will agree with me that we have had one of the best panels. Thank you so much. Thank you, Dr. Damson. Thank you, Philippa. Thank you, Judy, and thank you, Regina. We've come to the end of this, and I will hand over to Julie to take us into the next session. Thank you so much.
Hello viewers, once again. Thank you for keeping with us. We have the last part of this session, which is launching 2 books. One by one of the panelists who has just read for us already. And the book, once again, is titled Living in the Moment. So you can get yourself a copy from a restock bookstore at 29,000. So please feel free to just walk in and grab yourself a book and enjoy the stories, because you listen to the writers. The stories are very fascinating. The stories are very encouraging for those of you who want to write your own stories. So you have a starting point because someone has stepped in that hard space for you to be able to have something to work with. So grab yourself a copy of the book and read it, and then think about how you can write your own memoir. I would like to also mention the second book that we'll be launching in this session. The book is entitled Invisible Trauma, and I'll talk about it a little bit later, but let me first take the opportunity to launch about 15 authors, each contributing a story or two, depending on what they were able to write from that workshop. So we'll launch this book, but before we do, we would like to have what's in this book, who also happens to be the person that we had on the previous panel, to share their experience about what it was like participating in that workshop, and also what it was like writing the stories that they managed to put in this collection, in this anthology. So Regina, please share with the audience your experience of writing your own personal stories, but also, more importantly, the experience of participating in the workshop, learning with everybody, and being able to pen your life stories. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judy, for giving me this opportunity. And I'm very, very honored to be a contributor to this anthology. The workshop was in 2017. And as I mentioned earlier during my panel, the reason why I got interested in the life writing workshop is because I'm working on my life story, but not just my life story, but my mother's life story and my grandmother's life story. And so when I saw the call for participants for the workshop, the life writing workshop that was organized by FEMRITE in partnership with the University of Barcelona, I was very interested, because it is one thing to just want to write your story, but then you need to know, to have the skills, how do you go about it? And of course we have talked about some of these things during the panel. But also, so that workshop was very, very enlightening, I can say that. Because we started from, the first thing that we started with was our names, just starting from the point of your name. Because your name is your identity. And so if you're doing a life writing, of course, your identity is the first point of beginning, I can say. Of course, it depends. You can begin with your name, or your place of origin, or your tribe, whatever it is. What is it that you identify as? And I remember the first day of the workshop, we started with our names. And why I found that very interesting is because my name has been one of those things that I have struggled with as a woman. And as a woman, names are something that women struggle with. A woman almost like doesn't have a name, an identity, and her own identity, because usually when you are a child, a daughter is born, you are someone's daughter. And then when you get married, you're someone's wife. And then when you give birth, you are someone's mother. And in my culture, so we will say Nyaja Soni, and that means she's from Soni, but we don't know her name. But that's the name and she's my auntie, and she's been, my entire village knows her by the village where she comes from, and that's the woman. And if she is not known by the village where, or she's mother to so and so. So starting from the point of the name, I remember that was something that was really, that touched me a lot. And for me it was double, because my names are my grandmother's names. Because both my names, Regina Assini, are my grandmother's names. So basically I don't have a name. So for a long time I'm like, what's my name? Because, and so I will just read, if you can allow me, to read the sector of the name, what I wrote here. Sorry. So, Regina Assini, they call me Regina Assini. It is not my name, it is father's mother's name. My father chose to give me her name, Regina Assini. Regina, the name that testified that she worshipped through the recitation of the Rosary. Before she went to Nagongera mission, she was Assini, the third one who comes after twins, daughter of Choki. She was Assini, Nyar Choke. Then she learned the rosary, and as a reward, drops of water were sprinkled on her forehead, and she became Regina Assini. I do not speak to my Creator by counting beads. My mother has never borne twins. I am the daughter of Osinde, but I am called Regina Assini, a name with more identities than one person can carry. The ones of my father's mother's clan call me daughter of Choke. Auntie. The ones of mother's clan call me mother, mother-in-law, mother of our daughter's husband, Regina Assini.
Thank you so much, Regina. That's a very powerful story. Sometimes our identity is mixed up in things that we can't even recognize. So I kind of relate with you in many ways, but that's a story for another day. So I would like to take the honor to read the other that appear in this book, in this anthology. There is Warren Awomujisha, Regina Assini, Damson Kahyana, who also happened to be one of our panelists today, Paul Kisache, Peace Chamuleku, Mase Mirembe Tangare Doctor, Edna Namara, Ife Pianki, Margaret Ntakalimaze, Philomena Raukuku, Phil Wilmot, Nachsanze Segawa, Joyce Walayo, and that is the list that makes this book. So when Regina talks about the experience that she had at the workshop, these are the people that she was trying to write these stories with. So the stories that are in this book are all true life stories, and I think they are stories that we need to read. Each person could have a copy. Before we get to launch the book, there is a request from the audience that Judy could read again from her book. And I think I would also like to echo that request. And we have another reading from you, please. As she picks a piece, an excerpt for us, I would like to remind our viewers that the FEMRITE week of activities is still going on until Saturday this week. Tomorrow we'll have a masterclass in faction writing. So faction, for those of us who might be wondering, it's a combination, from my layman's understanding, it's a combination of fiction and then true life, which is what we are grappling with right now. So there will be a masterclass, and I think it will be led by our own Doreen Baingana, and then there will be another masterclass in storytelling. Then there will be a storytelling session. Sometimes we want to be able to reach as many audiences as possible, but there are people that cannot read. So if we can share our stories by telling them orally, I think it's also a great way to get to those audiences. And then on Saturday, we will have a keynote address by Mwalimu Austin Bukenya, and we'll have a panel discussion after that on poetry and the public voice. So please be part of these events. They are powerful events for us to share our different experiences in writing and to be able to learn how to grow our writing and how to reach audiences that we want our work to reach. So allow me to transfer the mic to Judy so that we can have another excerpt from her work. Thank you.
Thank you. Evening routines included fetching water, bathing, taking tea, eating late supper, and then praying. Praying was non-negotiable and took place in the big sitting room every single night. Grandmother would lead the prayers most of the time, and before prayers commenced, would shout out loudly, "Bana mwe muje musabe," meaning, "Children, come and pray." I abhorred praying. Most times I knelt down and slumped over the sofa and pretended to pray. Grandmother had a habit of repeatedly citing King Nebuchadnezzar in the book of Daniel in the Old Testament in her prayers, and I could not understand why. Her prayers dragged on, and I would start dozing and would eventually fall asleep, only to be jolted out of my slumber because of the loud Amina, Amen, uttered by all who were still awake in unison. We would then be shooed to bed. Bana mwe, mukende mwebake. Children, go to bed.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much, Judy, for sharing that excerpt as well. I can't wait to get a copy and have it autographed, because I have the chance to just get an autograph because the author is right next to me. So I can't wait for that copy to be in my hands. We would like now to launch this, our second book. It's a FEMRITE publication, and I know you can find copies in many places, including at FEMRITE, Aristoc, and online, African Books Collective. So, Regina, please take the honors of launching this awesome book. And we can all have copies of the book.
Okay, I take the honor to launch Invisible Traumas, Healing, Loving, Writing. And Julia has already spoken about it, but at this moment, I would like to say this book is now available and it is in the public domain. You can get your copy from FEMRITE, and I think Aristoc and our African bookstore. You can also get your copy from there. Congratulations to all the contributing authors. The book is launched.
Once again, thank you so much, the members that were with us on the panel. Thank you, Jocelyn, for moderating the